Nancy Carr is the author of Last Call, a memoir, and she's with me today to talk about her book, her blog, and her story. You're not going to want to miss this conversation with Nancy Carr.
Here, we want to show you what's possible in the world of sobriety. We introduce you to the various tools, programs, and resources available, because there are way more options than you may even realize. We want you to find the one that works for you.
And we do it through people. People who share their pathway to recovery and will help you find your path to freedom. Because getting sober can feel hard enough. You don't have to do it alone. I'm Sarah Roberts.
And I'm Roger DeVoe, and this is Sobriety Starts Here.
Nancy Carr, I have been looking forward to this conversation all week. We're going to be talking about your book, Last Call. I want to put it right in the middle. And we're going to be talking about your blog. So first off, welcome, Nancy.
Hi, Sarah. How are you?
I'm doing so well. Thank you very much for spending some time with me today. I know it's never easy.
Excited.
I know, it's not easy to carve out time to do these things, but it's such an important thing that you're doing, having this conversation with me, because we never know who's watching and who's listening and who needs to hear the message that you're sharing. So First and foremost, the way that we structure these interviews is we want to go right into the tool or the product or the program that we're kind of pointing people to so that they can get something out of it. So I want to talk about your memoir, Last Call, and I want to kind of go deep in why you wrote it, how it felt writing it, and who did you write it for?
Good questions on all accounts. So I didn't even set out to write my memoir, right? So a couple months before I even got sober in late 2003, I was typing in I had a laptop journal that I was typing in, and I was still drinking and using. Cocaine was my drug of choice. And I was typing in there that I think I have a problem, I think I need help. And I was just kind of typing about how horrible my life was, how much self-loathing I had, and just kind of really asking for help, but just asking it to the universe without really asking.
Yeah.
And then a few months later, I got my second DUI, and it took about 6 weeks for me after that second DUI to walk into a 12-step meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Or a court card that I had to get signed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I had no desire to get sober. It was just, I had to appease the courts, and this is what I'm going to do. And anyway, and then of course I ended up getting sober, but I started as far as doing some 12-step work around kind of my story, right? My first step, I just continued to keep typing in my journal and writing about when was the first time I remember seeing alcohol, and when was the first time I drank alcohol, and really just putting all these things down on paper.
Mm-hmm.
And pretty soon, in 7 months, 8 months or so, I kind of started forming it to maybe say oh, maybe this could be a memoir, right? This was also around the same time that James Fry's memoir was coming out, or actually it had come out. I'd already read it. I just read Augustine Burroughs' Dry. So I was thinking along those lines, and not thinking oh, I want to, have my memoir and then be like a James Fry or anything like that. But it was just something for me to kind of work towards, in addition to just getting sober in that first year.
And we don't want to be like a James Fry, because his story was ended up having a ton of holes in it.
That had a lot of holes in it, which is so interesting, because when I read it, I was so did this really happen? I can't imagine this really happened.
Oh my gosh, I'm with you. So I read A Million Little Pieces is the title of the book, and I devoured it. I could not believe what I was reading.
Here.
And I was newly sober when I first read it. And I was just who talks like this? And oh my God, and that is so incredible. And I mean, it was just so over the top, and then, but also incredible. And the writing was so good. And then to see him on Oprah admitting that it was not altogether true. And oh my gosh, I won't spoil
I think he just exaggerated a lot of it, right?
Absolutely.
And anyway, but
in his defense, I feel like he was sort of given some really poor guidance from the people that he was working with at the time, because anyway, so we won't go into that. But for anyone watching, A Million Little Pieces is an amazing read. Whether or not it's all true or not doesn't matter. It's just a really powerful book to read.
Right. So anyway, so I took a couple writing classes or courses just locally. One of the women that was teaching this course had her own publishing business. She was a full-time editor. So, I just kind of came to her with this. I wasn't even finished, actually. I think I was probably almost like 3/4 of the way through it. And, I asked her to give it a read and tell me what she thought. And she thought it was interesting. And, we started just talking more and ended up hiring her to be my editor. So she worked with me for about 8 months on it. And she also helped me, go to some writing seminars, writing conferences, and was trying to help me with my query letters, and was like really trying to help me kind of get this either picked up by an agent or get it published, and nobody had any interest in it. So I literally like just put it on my bookshelf, and like life got lifey, right? After you're sober and your job's doing really well and things are happening, life just got really busy.
Mm-hmm.
And I did actually run a bunch of copies and send it to some friends and family. I mean, specifically with my family, I had to change my name specifically. I had to take out some things just for the sake of, not really wanting to go into other areas. So, I kind of did all that. And a friend of mine in 2015 had self-published something on Amazon, and she had read it from years prior. And she reached out to me and she was like, why don't you self-publish your memoir? This might be a great avenue for you. Yeah. And by then I'd already had my blog with the same name, Last Call, but I hadn't really been utilizing it as a vehicle for sobriety. So I ended up self-publishing it, doing a couple things to it, really promoting it on my blog and really promoting it on the internet. And pretty soon, within a few months, I was just part of this amazing online sober blogging community. Yeah. Like the Sober Senorita, Holly Whitaker, Laura McCowan, like all these women, right, that were doing the same kind of thing. And it was, oh my gosh, it's been such a great experience in my sobriety to kind of be connected with other people outside of the physical connection, right?
Absolutely.
So, and that's kind of how it came about. So to answer that question there.
Yeah. So when you were writing it, I know you were saying that you were kind of just using it almost like your own journal.
Right.
When you really did start working with that editor, was that when you started really knowing I'm writing this for myself, but really putting it out there for other people? Yeah.
And my whole like thought process and like wanting to publish it and get it out there was to really help young women. Like that's where I was going at with that, because for me, I knew I had a drinking and drug problem. I really didn't care. I was living my life the same at 37 as I was at 19 when I really started doing drugs and alcohol. And it's like, if I would have read something like this, and I was a pretty avid reader, but if I would have read this kind of a memoir, maybe in my 20s, maybe it would have made me stop and think. But I didn't think that I was that bad, because I surrounded myself with people that drank and used the way I did. I was, in this environment for so many years and would pick a partner because of that and would date drug dealers. And it just made sense to me because those were the two things I loved the most, right? Cocaine and alcohol.
Yeah.
So I did it as more of like a cautionary tale. It's like a girl in high school who thinks she's a party animal, or a girl in college who's, partying on the weekends, a weekend warrior. So, and it's been great because I've gotten a lot of feedback from young females as well as older females, but just, it's so great to get those emails like, thank you so much. Your story really helped me. And, that was the main reason in wanting to put something out there.
Oh, and I'm so glad you did put it out there. And I'm so glad that's the feedback you're getting, because I have to be honest with you. I don't know if when I was in my active addiction, if I would have even thought to go to a bookstore or a library and look for books on recovery and memoirs of people that have gotten sober. Like, I just don't even know if I would have gone there. And I feel like the conversation, the dialogue is changing now. I think that more and more people are looking to the alcohol story, to not drinking, to teetotaling, to sobriety. Like it's just more of a thing now.
It's more of mainstream to talk about it so openly. I mean, when I got sober, somebody said, read Dry. Somebody said, read Drinking a Love Story, which I loved, by Caroline Knapp. So it was like, this made sense, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It made sense. So you've touched on your story, and I mean, your book is your story. So I want to go now diving deep into your personal story. So can we start back at the beginning? Can you share with us how you were raised and your childhood a little bit, and then moving us all the way through your active addiction and what that looked like, and then of course when you got sober?
Of course, of course. So, middle child, raised in a middle-class family, Italian household. My dad's like really Italian, moved around a little bit, but, we never wanted for anything. It was a pretty, I don't want to say idyllic, but it was a pretty happy childhood overall, right? My dad is, and I can say this now because he says to me, I'm so sorry I gave you my disease, right? So growing up in that alcoholic household, and never really knowing any different.
Mm-hmm.
My best friend down the street, her mom was, an alcoholic, and she had 5 brothers and sisters, and there was a lot going on at that house. So it just seemed normal, like families were like this, kind of chaotic, but with alcohol in the home.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember being like 5 or 6 years old, and before I even had a drink of alcohol, I ate a whole bottle of St. Joseph's Children's aspirin, and I got sick, and I did it again like 2 weeks later, right?
Oh, wow.
So and I didn't remember that story until I got sober. So before I even ever had a drink, in my eyes, I was like, I was an alcoholic out of the chute, I am my father's daughter. We kind of resemble each other. I have a lot of his mannerisms. We have a lot of the same commonalities that you'd have with a parent. So by the time I got to be 13, our family had a house at the Jersey Shore, and we went down. We used to go down every summer, and there was a big drinking party going on in our development that we lived in. And these girls that invited me thought I was 16. So I looked older than my age when I was 13, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was so excited to go, wow, this is like the big time. And, went to this teenage drinking party, and there was jungle juice, whatever with grain alcohol. So you couldn't taste the alcohol. It tasted like fruit punch. I had, 4 or 5 glasses, whatever. Ended up going home. I got sick. My brother just came home from being out with his friends. My parents were out for the night. They were on their way home. And my brother was just telling me to go to bed, and I wouldn't go to bed. And anyway, so my parents came home and saw me drunk, but I never got I wasn't punished. I wasn't grounded. I never had this talking to about, this is what alcohol is, or, nothing like that.
I totally relate to your story. And so many times reading your memoir, I was like, oh my gosh, I resemble my father. My father struggled with alcohol use disorder. I mean, same kind of story, same idea. I was drunk out of my mind the first time when I was probably 16 years old.
Right.
And the first time that my parents knew about it, and never that sit down. I sort of waited for it and thought it was going to come. And then it never happened, no conversation. And I was like, I guess I got away with this.
Yeah. And that's how it was for me. So it was always, just being, in high school, you're just trying things out. By the time I was 16, I started, I don't know, I think I was 16 or 18. I tried cocaine for the first time, scared to death. But as soon as I tried it with alcohol, I was like, oh my God, this combination together, I felt like it was home. I felt like that's what I needed. I was kind of a hyper kid too. So I think having a depressant and also a stimulant together, just for whatever reason, made me feel, it just gave me confidence. It made me feel good about myself. It made me have that liquid courage, so I can do anything. And I felt prettier and skinnier, all those things we talk about.
Yeah.
So I literally chased that for the next 24 years. I mean, I started dating the local drug dealer. We did that for a few years. I helped him with his drug operation. I felt so important, all these things, right?
Yeah.
And by the time I was 37 and got my second DUI, I had moved 25 times. I had at least 4 or 5 broken relationships. And I'd moved to California. So I moved, my families were from the Philadelphia area. So I'd moved literally cross country, and, I was like, life's in session here, and I'm still living my life the same way I did when I was 19 at 37 when I got that second DUI.
Did you have that conscious awareness after that second DUI? Did you have that conversation with yourself where you're like, I am the same person as I was at 19 right now?
Exactly. That's exactly the conversation I had. And also, oh my God, what am I going to do? And this was my second one, right? I had one a few years prior when I was back east visiting family and friends from California. And for me, it was like, I can't keep doing this, but I don't want to tell anybody. I can't tell anybody, I can't tell anybody what's wrong with me. I can't tell anybody what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So my girlfriend at the time, who I was drinking and using with, her dad was my DUI attorney. And she said, because she had started going to some 12-step meetings, she said, you know, you should get this court card signed. You're going to need it for court because it's your second DUI. And anyway, it took me like 6 weeks to go to a meeting because I was scared to death. Like, I didn't want to go. I didn't really want to quit drinking and using either.
Yeah.
So
were you still drinking and using after the second
Yeah,
DUI, even having that conversation?
So this is my big thing. After that second DUI, I resorted to boxed wine so I could drink more. I didn't have to leave the house. You know, I was the girl that would go to like Trader Joe's with my little basket and get flowers and chips and dip, like look like I was having people over with like 2 or 3 bottles of that $2 Chuck. And it was just me. And it would last for like, you know, a night or two, not even.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I was still doing that up until the day, well, even after I went to that first meeting. So going to that first meeting, I was scared to death. But as soon as I sat in that chair and I started hearing some of the things they read,
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh shit. Like I knew I had a problem for years. I just didn't care. I was like, I'm just going to ride this till the wheels fall off, you know?
Yeah. And I think so many of us can relate to that too, where it's
Right.
like, I am not messing with, if I say the words, I have a problem, then that means I've got to look at this shit. I am not looking at this right now. Because as soon as I have to start looking at it, I have to start thinking of changing it. And this is my only thing that I know, is a guarantee in my life, that I know when I drink this thing or take this drug or do this thing, I feel better. I feel more like myself. And how in the hell do I do life without this thing?
Right.
I wanted to ask you, so it's a while back now, but when you were a little girl taking that whole bottle of aspirin, like, did anything happen there with your parents? Were they freaked out that you had done that? And do you remember getting a sense of a feeling that you had from it that you liked?
Well, they tasted really good, right? They tasted like Sweet Tarts, those little children's baby aspirin. So I ate it for the taste. I thought it was like candy.
Got it.
And I don't remember getting punished or being told anything. I'm sure I was, you know, but the fact that I did it again, I didn't eat the whole bottle. I ate like half or something. But the fact that I did it again, knowing, I got really sick from it and everything. So that alone, I think looking back.
Yeah. That makes sense that they taste good. In my mind, I'm thinking, why would a 5-year-old child taste like they taste terrible? But yes, right. So they're sugary and tasty.
Right.
Okay, got it. Right. Okay, so fast forward through, you were at the point where now you've gotten your second DUI. You're scared to death to go to a 12-step meeting, but you do it.
Right.
So what's that first, after you sat down and you kind of were hearing those other stories, what happens next?
I just had my head in my hands and was like, oh shit, I need to be here. This is me. I need to do this. But as soon as that meeting ended, I ran out of there quicker than you can say alcoholic, and went home and drank 2 bottles of wine and got on a plane the next morning. I had to go back east for a family function. I was there for 5 days, and I drank the whole 5 days I was home. And I had a conversation with my best friend from high school, and I said to her, everything bad that's ever happened to me has been when I'm drinking and drugging. Like, maybe I should go back to that. I mean, I have to go back anyway. Maybe I should just give this a try. And that was my thought process going into it. It wasn't like, I really need to quit drinking. I tried a few times on my own, but it would last not maybe 2 days. So I did that, for whatever reason. The day I flew back, I didn't drink on the plane. I don't know why. And then the next day I went to a 12-step meeting. It was this big speaker meeting. This woman shared her story, and I related to everything she said. And after that, I was like, okay, I'm here, sign me up.
Yeah.
I bought my books. I got all these numbers from other women. Within a week, I was going to a women's meeting and got a sponsor. So I kind of did it like textbook. Like, I followed all the, the rules on how to get sober, right, through a 12-step program. And it just kind of happened that way. And like, looking back, I'm grateful that I didn't question anything, because I didn't know anything. I didn't know what certain slang terms meant, keep coming back, or when they talked about people going out, I'm like, where are they going? Where's everybody? I had no idea relapse was part of the program, like that you could relapse. I thought like, once you have to stay, because I was so like scared. I was, fear kept me sober for a bit in the beginning, because I was so scared to drive or to just get in any more trouble. So I just was really naive and didn't understand a lot of like, this is what you do when you join this kind of 12-step program. So.
I think it's interesting that fear drove a lot of your decisions. I imagine that that's
Yeah.
a common thing for a lot of people that are in
Right.
trouble because of their drinking or drugging, that it's that constant fear, and also the fear of disappointing people once again, or having to admit things once again, or, you know,
Exactly.
another problem happens and you got to clean it up again. And yeah, I think that fear drives a lot of us in while we're still drinking and then getting into recovery. I imagine you're certainly not alone that way.
Yeah, most
So
definitely.
how long ago was it that you got sober?
So it'll actually be on May 11th. I'll have 14 years.
Amazing. 14
So,
years. And yet your memoir only came out in 2015, right?
yeah, so the book came out in 2015, and I already, of course, had some time. So yeah, I mean, it just kind of happened the way it happened that way.
So I would love for you to share with us, you know, some of the differences in your life that you see that are really palpable from your drinking life to your sober life. Like, does it look anything the same anymore? You were saying that you were sort of the same at 37 as you were at 19.
Right. I was living my life the same, right?
Right.
I had a better job. I was making more money, but basically living my life the same. Oh my gosh, it's so much different now. I can't even, 14 years is a pretty long time. Like, I can't even, like, sometimes I'll have to go back and read portions of my book to remember how bad it was.
Yeah.
When I wrote that memoir, I was really honest and it was really raw. Like, if I were to write that today, I don't know if I would have been so honest. Like, I was reading it and like cringing almost, right? So I feel like that life is a totally different person and a totally different somebody else's life, right? So, I mean, for me, I'm still grateful to wake up in the morning without a hangover and knowing, where I was last night and who I was with, and I have money in my pocket today, and, and just not waking up with that horrible feeling, that, incomprehensible demoralization they talk about, where I just can't stand myself. And how did I get here again? How did I do this again? I'd be the kind of person that's like, I'm going to go out for one drink.
Yeah.
And, 8 hours later, I'm in some whatever place I shouldn't be and doing things I shouldn't be doing. And that was on rinse and repeat for years.
Yeah. And I think so many people can relate to that wash, rinse, repeat. Like, we're here again. How did we make this same mistake again and again and again? And it drives us crazy, but we just can't, until we can finally hit whatever that bottom is, or create a bottom for ourselves, or really see that there is another way. And that's, again, why I'm so excited to have you here to talk about this. This is 14 years ago, and you wouldn't have written the same book that you wrote then. So I want to encourage anybody who's watching, if you are newly sober, use a journal, write it all down, get it all out, because you may not be able to remember it.
Yeah, I know I wouldn't have remembered it all, so I'm grateful that I had that wherewithal to know back then, and kind of grateful that it sat on that bookshelf, because I think 14 years ago, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have all these sober bloggers, and we just didn't have this community that we have today in recovery. With all these different outlets. So I think it was supposed to happen that way, right?
I totally agree. I think it was, divine timing, all of it, no matter what part of it.
Exactly.
I'm curious, is relapse a part of your story at all?
So no, it's not. And I remember being in early recovery, and this girl I got sober with had relapsed after a year. And she like literally said to me, she's like, I don't even know if you're an alcoholic because you haven't relapsed.
Oh.
And at the time I thought, wow, maybe. And then of course, in my head, well, maybe I'm not. But then I had to look at all my consequences. And really for me, I know I'm an alcoholic because of my thinking, right? Like my crazy itty bitty shitty committee thinking. Like, I know that when you put a drug or alcohol in my system, I am not going to know what's going to happen, right? Like, I just know that because I have so many past experiences. And there's been a couple times when, I've been like, F it, I want to drink, I'm really lucky. Like, I realize what a gift it is that I did not go back out and try to experiment or anything like that. Marijuana was not part of my story. I think since it's so available now, especially I'm in California, there's a lot of people that are experimenting with that, right? And there's some people that probably still are sober, but just do other things outside of alcohol. But for me, relapse has not been part of my story. So I'm here to tell you, you can get sober once and stay sober. I think it's really just, at least for me, it's just been following direction, following a few simple suggestions and doing kind of the same thing over and over to keep my recovery fresh and green, and really being of service to other people. Like that's a big part of my story too, you know.
What an amazing tool. I'm going to ask you shortly, what are some of the tools that you use in recovery? But what I found through these conversations is meaningful work and being of service are two of the biggest tools. And I couldn't agree more. I think that when we can take our mess and turn it into our message and help other people with it, there's so much power in that. I'm curious because I know you, so AA, that's part of your story and how you got sober. And do you use the label alcoholic regularly? Is that something that you struggle with at all? Or is that something that fits you and you like using that label?
You know, I've been using it, like, I know there's this new terminology around it, right? So I do say, like, of course, if I'm in a meeting, I'm Nancy and I'm an alcoholic. If I'm at a meeting that's Cocaine Anonymous or whatever, I'll say I'm a drug addict. Or if I'm doing an H&I commitment where I'm going into a treatment center and speaking, I'll definitely say I'm like a drug addict too. When I've spoken like twice at more of a outside of an AA forum, I've said, I'm Nancy, I'm a person living in long-term recovery. Yeah. So I think it's different, but specifically in the rooms of AA, I have no problem saying I'm an alcoholic. I mean, I don't think it's my identity. I'm not labeling myself. I'm comfortable saying that. I know there's a lot of other opinions surrounding that, but for me, that's just what works.
Yeah, I totally get it too. So for a long time, if you know my story at all, I got sober and I was so ashamed of that label that I would never use it. And I would never conceive of going to an AA meeting because I would have to say that word and I just refused. So when I finally came out and I was clean about my truth and I wanted to share the truth of my life, I launched my blog and I used that word that I am an alcoholic. And it felt so empowering and I felt so proud to be able to finally wear that label and to share it and to say, this is the truth of who I am. And this is why I'm the way I am. And I've been hiding this and I don't want to hide anymore. But over the years, I have started to shift that a little bit. And like you say, with all of this new dialogue that's going on about labeling. And so I typically now use more words like sober and in recovery and I don't drink. And so it doesn't
you're
come up
much more out in the public, you've got a lot more vehicles that you're out there pushing forth. So, I think for somebody like yourself, sometimes that makes better sense, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And I think just whatever makes us feel fully integrated and authentic. And that's going to be different for each and every one of us. And that's the beauty of life is that we all get to be who we want to be and we can label ourselves or not and choose whatever fits. So I respect whatever people choose to do.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask you about your tools. So obviously AA is a big one. That's something that really helps you. What else do you use in your recovery?
So AA is a big one. I mean, I sponsor girls. I have a sponsor. I'm actively working a program, right? I go to meetings. I go to Al-Anon too. I don't go as much as I should, but I do go to Al-Anon. I'm married to somebody else who I met in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. But my tools for me, so I kind of have a morning routine where I get up in the morning, I do my morning stretches, then I sit down and do my prayer and meditation. I do a gratitude list at least twice a week. And, for me also, it's just about internalizing like how I'm feeling that day, like really honoring myself, right? Like some days I'll wake up and I'm not feeling great. And usually there's some resentment I have against somebody or, so a lot of it's like journaling and getting that out. I journal every night, usually like just 2 or 3 pages freestyle. And I pray every night, but also picking up the phone, like that's a big one for me. I'll do that thing, what we talk about, like I'll call my bitch buddies and I'll call a girlfriend and she'll co-sign my stuff. And then I'll call my sponsor and she'll give me the hard wave of how I'm supposed to handle that. So those are like my main tools, but really, and just getting out and I mean, I live right by the ocean, so every weekend I'm walking by the ocean with friends. I mean, there's a lot of things that just kind of balance my life out. And then I get this great career opportunity where I get to work from home 5 days a week for a company back east. And, that is like my biggest sustainer because it's the same constant, that's in my life. And I've been doing this career for almost 20 years. So that's been like a big deal too.
That's so cool. So you were in the same career while you were in your active addiction.
I was.
And
I don't know how, I mean, I think I found out later on that there was a couple people that I worked with and worked for that knew something was up, but I was also that girl that every 2 or 3 years, I'm going to quit this company and go to a different one because they're going to find out what's going on. And, And, you know, some of them did. I had to go back and do amends with some. And that was fine. But I was lucky. I mean, I could go out drinking and drugging and not have any sleep and show up at work. I mean, and thinking about that now, like I must have smelled, or like driving to work, I was drunk, you know, like I heard a story recently about a woman who got a DUI. She was a teacher and she got it on her way to school to teach.
Wow.
And her BAC was really high. And I was like, oh my God, like that would just be horrible, right?
Oh, well, and I think that we can all, I mean, any one of us who has struggled with addiction, we can no longer point fingers and say, how could she possibly do this thing, or he? It's like, we all know that it could just as easily been us. How many times did I, you know, get 3 hours of sleep, look outside, oh, my car's there, I guess I drove home and got myself ready for work and drove to work. Believe me, I would have blown over for sure.
Yeah, most definitely.
Oh my gosh, there but the grace of God, right?
Exactly. That's exactly it.
Mm-hmm. So I want to know from you, what is the best thing about being clean and sober?
You know, there's so many things. I think getting a relationship with myself initially in that first year and a half, you know, I didn't date. I was like scared to death of men. And I had a problem with men before I got sober. I mean, I was like just cycling through them, right? And when I got sober, I was just, I was like, you know, I didn't feel comfortable in my own skin around guys, right? So kind of really getting to know myself and being comfortable with who I was. That was, you know, I think that's been one of the biggest gifts. And just having that, like being present, you know, being present for anything that's coming forth in my life. And not being, you know, not really like chained to being an alcoholic and a drug addict. I mean, I was in such deep grips of that. I didn't really realize how bad I was until I got sober. And to wake up and to not want to live that life again anymore, you know, that alone is a gift, right? And to just have that freedom, like the freedom of bondage of self, the bondage of alcohol and drugs, like that to me is the best thing possible. And just getting sober.
Oh, totally.
And being able to carry the message and help other people. Like those are the main things, I think, for me, most definitely.
Just interesting when you were saying about how, you know, how you're feeling, that looking back on it, you didn't realize it was that bad. And yet how many times while we were in our active addiction, was it like, oh my God, what am I doing?
Right.
You know, where you'd wake up and you're hungover, you feel like shit, you have to get something done. And you kind of know how bad it is then.
Right. I mean,
what hindsight we have when we're sober, right? Yeah.
I would wake up in places where I didn't know how I got there. I'd be 2 hours from home, like, how did this happen? Oh, of course, this is how this happened, because I didn't care and I was selfish and just wanted what I wanted, you know. You know, and living life sober and you know, life gets lifey. You know, I went through my mom passing away a few years ago. I had to move back east for a time. And then I was eventually able to come back to California. But, you know, things like that, and just showing up and being a sober daughter, right? And just being present and not, you know, not grabbing the drink because of that pain, you know, and being able to go through things like that have been really a big, huge kind of, you know, I don't want to say challenge, but it's just been a huge eye-opening experience that going through those experiences and coming out the other side, you know. All that's
speaking with Jean McCarthy, and she was saying that feeling of being trusted. And like, it brought me to tears, because I remember, so when my brother had their first baby, their daughter, I was sober when they had her, and being called to ask to be her legal guardian if anything ever happened to them. And it was just like, I couldn't believe, I mean, I broke down in tears. Just, I could never have imagined that I would have been asked while I was actively drinking and, you know, not taking care of myself and just being a total wreck. And to know that I was trusted in that way and that I could get things done. So I really relate to that when you say, you know, your mom passed and, you know, you were the daughter, that you could be there and you could help the family.
Right. Yeah. Being trusted is huge too, right? Like, I don't really have much to lie about anymore. You know, when I was doing my amends, a lot of people would say to me, well, yeah, your lying was so all over the place. And I didn't even realize it, you know?
And were they saying that they knew you were lying while you were lying?
Yes. And I'm thinking they didn't know. And, you know, there were some people, like friends I would go to, I'm like, oh, I got sober. And they're like, oh, thank God. And I was like, wow, really? You know, like nobody really pulled me aside and was like, you've got a problem. you know? I mean, I think my sister made a comment once, but I dated a guy once who said, well, you know, we're both alcoholics. And I was like, really? What? You know, like things like that. So
maybe you are, man, but
yeah. So naive.
Isn't that funny? We think we're getting away with these lies, and yet
Right.
people are like, oh my God,
yeah,
not happening.
That's not going to happen. Yeah.
No. Oh my gosh. I have a question that I love asking, and I pull this one from Oprah. Nancy Carr, what do you know for sure?
Oh gosh, that's a good one. What do I know for sure?
That's an Oprah one. It's not mine.
I know for sure that if I get up every morning and I pray and I meditate and I do the things I was taught to do in early recovery, that I'm going to have a much better chance of staying sober that day. Because, you know, I can't think that I'm always going to be sober, right? I mean, you hear about people that just out of the blue, they just picked up or something happened and they started drinking again. And then they don't get sober again. Right. I mean, I don't have the monopoly on this deal just because I got sober at my second meeting. But what I know for sure is if I keep doing the things I did in the beginning, I'm definitely going to have a much better chance of staying sober than if I don't. I just know if I don't keep doing the things I'm doing now, I might pick up a drink. I might not remember how bad it was because I go to that place still. I'll still say, you know what, it wasn't that bad. You know, 2 DUIs, horrible relationships, drug addict, this, that, geographics, hating myself, you know, oh, it wasn't bad. But then I remember, like, for me, the biggest, I guess one of the biggest assets in my recovery is remembering my last drink. And I remember that feeling, you know, and it felt desperate and it felt rash. And I was drinking out of a bottle of wine by myself in a dark room. And I didn't know it was going to be my last drink, you know? So like, somebody would say to me, oh, what's your sobriety date? And I'm like, what's that? And they're like, well, when was your last drink? And I'm like, oh, and then when I thought about it, I was like, gosh, if I knew that was going to be my last drink, I would have done it entirely different, right? I would have wanted more champagne or more, you know, whatever. But you just don't know. And like, that's for me, like a big thing as far as like having a God that I believe in, right? Like these things happened and I just, for once, like didn't hit the snooze button on it. I was like, okay, I'll take that invitation. As Glennon Doyle always says, you know, you get this invitation from the universe or from God or whatever, and you just accept it and keep going forward with that.
Oh my gosh, how beautifully said. And I'm so glad that you did take that invitation because you've been able to then take that mess and turn it into your message. The book is called Last Call, a Memoir by Nancy Carr. And where can people find this book, Nancy?
You can get it on Amazon. It's Kindle, and it's also in a paperback version. So those two versions, you can get it on Amazon.
And your blog is found at lastcallblog.me.
Right.
So people can go and check out your writing now because it is funny reading this. This is so much, it's so in the past now. You know, when I met you in New York City last year, it was like, this was no longer even close to being who you really are, but it is part of who you are. I mean, that is what we're doing here with sharing our stories. It's to show that someone like that looks the way you look now, this beautiful, bright, vibrant, stunning, you know, hardworking, happy, successful woman sitting before me having this conversation was once drinking wine out of a bottle, trying to get Joey, you called it, your cocaine.
Yeah, that's what I call cocaine.
Yeah. And, you know, that was you. You were trying to cop it. You're dating, you know, drug dealers, and you're just not living the life that you were intended to lead.
I know. It's amazing to me too when I think about it. It's like a completely different life. But, you know, in my memoir too, I also talk about, I think, the first year or two of recovery, you know, and what that looks like. Because for somebody that I didn't really know much about it at all, I had no idea that I didn't know there were normal drinkers. I didn't know that people could be really recovered. I didn't know anything about that recovery world. So, you know, that was a huge thing to kind of like find that out and explore it and get to know myself, like things that I just never even would have thought of because I was so focused on, you know, alcohol, drugs, the next guy, the next job, the next apartment, like all of that stuff. That's how my world revolved. Yeah.
Would you agree then that codependency was a big part of your story as well? Like,
yes.
You talked about men a lot. Like you always seem to have men. When I was reading your memoir, like there was always a guy, and you mentioned that.
Yeah, there was. So when I got sober and I didn't have a guy for the first, I think it was 14 months or so, you know, that was like a big deal, but I was like grateful, you know. But yeah, the codependency part is really big. So like I said, I go to Al-Anon. I probably don't run the best Al-Anon program, but I go and I understand it, and I have the readers, and I have women that kind of guide me along. You know, like I said, I'm married to somebody in the program, so that's really challenging, right? You know, and just, yeah, not relying on other people for my happiness. That's been actually a huge kind of eye opener, right? Like, I didn't know that that's possible. I didn't know that that was a healthy relationship.
Right. You thought that it was all about, you're going to make me happy and I'm supposed to make you happy. Yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah.
It does not work like that.
Right.
That's such a big lesson, I think, for all of us. I think that so often that marketing and you know, media and movies, everything tells us that we're going to be completed when we meet that other person, and we really give our power away when we take on that belief, because it's just a big fat lie. I mean, I don't think most people know that. Like, you're not supposed to be so codependent. You know, I mean, what I'd say normies are people out there that aren't like trying to better themselves or on a spiritual path or journey or anything. But once you find that out, you're kind of, like, for me, I was a little relieved, because I was like, okay, I can have much more of my own life, you know, and that's kind of what I have now too. I mean, my husband and I probably only have date night like once a week, and we're both pretty busy doing our own things. And, you know, when we get together on a weekend for sure, but you know, I'm doing a lot of things during the week separate from him, you know. I kind of love, though, that you carve out that special time, that date night once a week with each other. I think that's that's important. I think we need to do that. We need our own time on our own. And I think that's a wonderful way to get started on sort of, you know, unpacking the puzzle that is codependency. It's give yourself, you know, for like a challenge, go out by yourself, you know, go out by yourself for a meal and see if you can do it, if you can handle it, and try not to just
I love doing stuff like that.
Me too.
I'm happy to do that. But I mean,
but I wasn't always.
You to just focus on taking care of yourself, right? And not be focused on the alcoholic or addict in your life, which is so hard to do, you know? And like, just through that teaching alone of just focusing on ourselves and not letting the other person's life or addiction, you know, try to control us, that's a challenging thing to do too.
Well, it's so hard. I mean, so you're talking about when people are in relationships with people who are in active addiction?
Yeah, most definitely.
So hard.
Yeah,
it's a really tough one. And I think that, for people watching right now, if you are the person that's in a relationship or a family member that is the one struggling with addiction, I mean, for sure, Al-Anon really does do a good job of helping you to work a program that really can help. So I think that I don't really know of any other really systematic programs other than Al-Anon that really support the family members. I know Smart Recovery does some of it, and others do as well. But I really think, from what I've heard, I've not done Al-Anon, but from people like you and others that have spoken about it, it's a great program.
Yeah, most definitely.
Nancy Carr, if there is one thing that you could tell your younger self, what would it be?
Oh gosh. Listen to the red flags, you know? I mean, but I know, so when I was 19, I was actually in a detox for a little bit. And I knew that I had a problem, but I also knew that I was not even close to stopping, you know? So I think it was, you know, I just didn't trust my gut a lot when I was younger, you know? I just did what I wanted to do, even doing things I knew that were bad for me, doing things I knew that I would get in trouble for, and I didn't care.
Yeah.
So like, I don't know, listening to your inner self and that intuition, you know?
Yeah.
And really noticing, like I said, noticing those red flags, or, you know, I shouldn't be doing this, you know? Because I mean, I got lucky. I put myself in bad situations and I was able to walk out of them okay, but not everybody has that. So for me, I think it's just, you know, really trusting your instinct and trusting your gut. So I can trust it now more, right? Not as good, but a lot better than when I was younger. So that's good.
I think that is honestly amazing advice, especially to young people out there now. I agree with you so much. I ignored my inner wisdom, and I look back now and I know those, I can even point to different moments where it was like, even the night that I got my DUI, my mother called me at the office, and she never would call me at the end of the day. And she just called to say, because she knew I was going out for dinner with a friend. And she just said, be careful tonight. And I was like, it's fine. And in my gut, I knew what she was saying. She was saying, don't drink. And if you're going to drink too much, don't drive.
Right.
I knew what she was saying. I knew the message, and it was received, and it was, you know, tidily ignored and shoved under the rug.
Exactly.
Heeding it at all.
Yeah.
Such good advice. Listen to that, cultivate that voice. And how can we do that? Maybe things like meditation and yoga and, going for walks, journaling, listening to music, trying to figure out things that I think for me, a big part of my story is I didn't even know who I was so disconnected from who I really am that I didn't even know what I liked. Like I didn't even know what my favorite color was or what my favorite meal was. Like I really was so disconnected from who I really was because I was always the one just fitting in with everybody else, just the party girl, just doing what everyone was doing as far as drinking and doing drugs and just having fun. And I really wasn't listening to what I really liked or cultivating a real relationship with myself. And I think that had I done that and built some trust within myself and really built my integrity and listened to that inner voice, I might have been able to have more strength to be able to maybe avoid some of the terrible mistakes that I made.
Right, those pitfalls. I mean, I didn't know what the word integrity meant and had to look it up when I got sober. I'm like, what's that? Like basic things. Like, where was I in school for that? I don't know, but yeah. It's like relearning how to live life again, especially from an emotional sobriety standpoint, when we get sober.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I mean, I know you've shared them, but to build our emotional stability, what are some of the ways that you suggest doing that?
Yeah. So it's something that I focus on a lot now in my sobriety is that emotional sobriety and can I get that? And it's really having self-awareness. It's kind of some of the tools I learned in early sobriety, but it's really putting them into practice. Like, don't say that thing I want to say to my husband because this is what will happen if I do. And then I'm going to have to make an amends. So just, they call it restraint of pen and tongue. Like, just keep it in and just, pray for him to God or to get whatever's going on in that situation. That's been a huge thing for me. Just really not making comments when I wanted to make comments, not making judgments of others. I saw Gabby Bernstein a few months ago in LA with Judgment Detox. And I was like, I really needed this, and I'd seen her before. She's great. So things like that, just being true to myself and not really trying to take everybody else's inventory and just being a better person throughout that. Because for me, the emotional sobriety is really focusing on how to live with my fellows, how to live and have really good relationships where I'm not being super selfish, where it's all about me, and it's just focusing on other people. I call my dad every weekend, I try to call my brother and sister every week or so, just like cultivating family relationships. Cause I'm like, you never know, life's so short, so that's kind of one of the bigger things I think for me on that emotional sobriety is really just really accepting others for who they are and just trying to focus on making myself a better person throughout that process, which is really hard. It's easy to say all this, right? But it's like putting it into application on a daily basis, a little bit more challenging. Yeah.
And at first when you were saying, biting our tongue, like not making the comments that you might want to make, and I was thinking, wait a minute, is that taking away from who we are and not being able to express ourselves? But then when you kept going, it was like, that's a really important thing to do in relationships where we need to decide when we need to say something and when it's a judgment of them and who they are as people and what right do we have to tell them how to live, if that's the kind of comment you were referring to. So
exactly.
That made sense.
Mm-hmm. Right. Telling them how to live their life or what they should be doing and like trying to control them really, that's what it comes down to. Mm-hmm. And that's a big thing in Al-Anon too, like not trying to control other people and letting them have their own path and having them. Yeah.
And it's funny because it makes me think of how many times would people tell us when we were, actively addicted, a lot of us have people in our lives that are saying, you really should stop, or you like, that didn't do anything for me. When anybody would say to me, wow, you drink a lot. I was like, see you later. Moving on.
Yeah. I had guys break up with me because I drank too much.
Oh, me too.
Like, okay, sorry. Like there was no like, oh no, I'll stop for you. Oh no, that's not happening at all.
Next.
Yeah, right? I know. Revolving door. Horrible.
Yeah, not a good life, not a good way to live. But look at you now. You're amazing. You're an inspiration. Thank you so much for being with me today.
And I think the same for you. And I hope I see you soon.
I hope so too. I'm hoping to see you soon. Oh my gosh. Thank you for this.
Thank you, Sarah.
To get access to all of the free videos and interviews, visit sobrietystartshere.com.